There was a time when every camera longed for her face. Every director wanted her name on the poster, and most men in Hollywood secretly wished they were the one walking her home. Diane Lane wasn't just beautiful. She had a magnetic presence, the kind of light that makes a room fall silent the moment she enters. From a Little Romance to Unfaithful, from the pure-hearted country girl to the woman who made betrayal look hauntingly beautiful, she carried a rare gift, the ability to be adored by millions yet feel profoundly alone. Behind the roles, the magazine covers, and the red carpet smiles was a woman who kept loving the wrong people, choosing the wrong paths, and quietly falling apart. 2 divorces, relationships that were never named, wounds as silent as shattered crystal beneath her feet, glittering, fragmented, and painfully sharp. So what does it feel like to be everyone's dream, but never anyone's final choice? In this video, you'll witness the heartbreak Diane Lane has endured. Moments so dark and brutal, they might truly leave you stunned. Let's begin. Diane Lane's life didn't just begin in heartbreak. It was steeped in it, like fabric left too long in dark water. She was born in the dead of winter, January 1965, into a romance that was already unraveling. Her mother, Colleen Farrington, a nightclub singer with eyes that always seemed to search for somewhere else, had once been a Playboy centerfold. Beautiful, magnetic, untethered. Her father, Burt Lane, a drama coach who taught actors to feel everything but couldn't hold his own life together. 2 weeks. That's all it took for their love to end. Diane was still a newborn when her mother took her and fled to Mexico, seeking distance from a marriage she didn't want, perhaps even from the child in her arms. It was the first of many times Diane would be left behind, physically or emotionally. In those early years, nothing was still. No walls were permanent. No bed was hers for long. Her world was made of dressing rooms and hallway shadows. Voices in the next room that turned sharp without warning. Her mother's world was loud, unpredictable, and glittering on the surface. But behind it there was no safety. Then, in a twist more suited to courtroom drama than a child's life, custody changed hands. Diane's father, the one who had stayed in New York, working night shifts as a cab driver and teaching acting on the side, won full custody. But winning her didn't mean he had a place to give her. They didn't move into a home. They moved into hotels, rooms with buzzing neon lights, stained ceilings, creaky floorboards, and no real doors between the bedroom and the world outside. The kind of rooms where you don't unpack, where you sleep in your coat in the winter, where the television is the only constant voice. Diane slept on fold-out beds, sometimes curled on towels when there weren't enough blankets. She learned to pack light and listen hard. Her father, often overworked and exhausted, would drive his cab late into the night, and she would ride silently in the back seat, a ghost with wide eyes, watching New York blur by in lights and fog. It was in those back seats that Diane Lane learned how to vanish, how to stay quiet, how to be agreeable so no one would leave again. There was no home, she once said, just motion. At school, she tried to pretend. She smiled. She memorized lines. She acted, always acting. But inside, she carried a quiet fear that she was someone people only kept when it was convenient. At 15, she reached a breaking point. Or maybe she just needed to feel in control of something. With her friend, actor Christopher Atkins, she boarded a plane to Los Angeles. No goodbye, no plan, just flight. It wasn't rebellion. It was heartbreak with a suitcase. When she returned, things didn't calm down. They escalated. Her mother, who had barely been present for years, suddenly came back into the picture, but not with open arms, with force. She kidnapped Diane and took her to Georgia, sparking a legal war that left a teenage girl suspended between 2 worlds, neither which felt like they wanted her for who she really was. For 6 weeks, Diane waited, not knowing if her father would come, not knowing if anyone was even fighting. That kind of waiting at 15 changes a person. When she was finally returned to her father, it wasn't triumph. It was just another room, another silence. For the next 3 years, she didn't hear a single word from her mother. No letters, no birthdays, just a deafening lesson. Even the people who bring you into this world can choose to walk away. There were no photos from those years, No holidays captured, no keepsakes kept, just a sharp memory of being told to be strong even when she was barely holding herself together. She once said that acting saved her because it was the only place where people wanted her to feel something. In real life, she was taught to feel nothing, or at least not to show it. The most tragic part of her childhood wasn't the instability. It wasn't the custody battles or cheap motels. It was this. Diane Lane grew up in a world where love didn't stay, where safety was something borrowed, where every door was one argument away from slamming shut. And perhaps that's why, even when she stood under Hollywood spotlights years later, there was always something far away in her eyes, as if part of her was still that girl in the back of a cab, watching the city pass her by, hoping someone, anyone, would finally turn around and say, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." At the age of 6, when most children were still learning to tie their shoes, Diane was already standing beneath the stage lights at La Mama Theater in New York. Not because someone made her, but because it was the only place she could exist without vanishing. She didn't act for fame. She acted because, offstage, no one listened. At 13, she faced a choice that should never come so early, Broadway or Hollywood. She chose film, and the world chose her. Her breakout role in A Little Romance didn't just place her beside acting royalty, Laurence Olivier. It crowned her the next Grace Kelly. Suddenly, the same girl who once curled up in the back seat of a taxi now graced the cover of Time magazine. She was no longer invisible. She was seen. But being seen is not the same as being understood. Stardom wrapped around Diane like a silk gown with thorns stitched inside. Every smile became a performance. Every compliment, a wait. Every man in Hollywood adored her image, but not one ever asked, "Are you okay?" She worked endlessly. Film after film, Touched by Love, Six Pack, The Outsiders, Rumblefish. She embodied rebellion, youth, longing, and ache. They called her the face of a generation, the muse of misfits, the beautiful girl with sad eyes. And yet behind the camera, Diane Lane was still that same child, waiting in motel rooms, packing quickly, never settling, still afraid love might leave the room while she blinked. She acted so well that the world forgot to check if she was acting off-screen too. Then everything stalled. Streets of Fire and The Cotton Club, her biggest projects at the time, failed at the box office. Suddenly, the press turned cold. At just 19, she was labeled overexposed, burned out, another beauty who couldn't hold momentum. So Diane disappeared, not from pain, but from exhaustion. She returned to Georgia, the very place her mother once kidnapped her the years before, and lived in silence. No cameras, no scripts, no applause. What happened during that time is known only to her. But when she came back, she was different. She didn't chase the spotlight. She let it find her, if it dared. Her comeback wasn't loud. It was intentional. Quiet roles, gritty characters. No longer playing to win hearts, just to tell the truth. Lady Beware, The Big Town. Then came Lonesome Dove and the Emmy nomination that marked her return. But it wasn't awards that mattered anymore. It was peace. Diane was offered the lead in Pretty Woman. She said no, not out of pride, but instinct. She no longer needed validation, dressed in diamonds. She had already walked the red carpets. She knew how lonely they were after the flashbulbs faded. By the late 90s, something shifted. In A Walk on the Moon, Diane wasn't playing a fantasy. She played a woman who breaks the rules, and then quietly grieves her own choices. Critics called her performance meltingly effective, but Diane didn't care about the reviews anymore. She cared about feeling honest for once. She had once been Hollywood's golden girl, then forgotten, then quietly reborn. And through that transformation, she learned something most stars never do, that the spotlight can be just as blinding as it is flattering. That applause can echo louder than a scream. That sometimes being admired by millions still feels lonelier than being truly loved by one. Diane Lane didn't fade. She chose stillness, not because she had nothing left to prove, but because, for the first time in her life, she didn't need to be seen to feel real. Cage. They met first on Rumblefish when both were still finding their place in Hollywood. But it wasn't until 2000 on The Family Man that things changed. Their friendship deepened into something quieter, something more intimate. For a time, they were close. They had a rhythm, but work got in the way. Or maybe timing did. They parted on good terms. No bitterness. Just one more almost. Matthew McConaughey came later in 2019 Serenity. Their chemistry on screen was electric, but behind the scenes there was a flicker of something real. He admitted to having a childhood crush on her. She laughed. She brushed it off. But part of her maybe was moved. In a world that had often taken more than it gave, a sincere confession, no matter how small, could still feel like warmth in cold places. And Robert Duvall, her co-star in Lonesome Dove, rumors swirled, as they always did when two actors burn too brightly on screen. But nothing ever happened, and she made that clear. He was a partner in craft, a friend, a man she respected deeply. And perhaps that too was a kind of love, one not romantic, but steady, the kind she never had enough of. She never denied these names. She never confirmed them either. That was her grace. That was her shield. Diane Lane never owed anyone an explanation for who touched her heart. Not after everything it had already endured. These weren't grand love stories. They weren't tragedies with third acts. They were quiet connections, short chapters, people who walked into her life when she needed something, a laugh, a reminder, a moment of being seen, and walked out without slamming the door. But don't mistake brevity for insignificance. Diane Lane didn't measure love by years or headlines. She measured it by how deeply it cut, how gently it healed, how much of herself she had to hide to make it last. Some of these men may have only been in her life for a season, but their presence left marks, soft, invisible, lasting. It's cruel, isn't it? To love in fragments, to keep giving and never quite getting back what you need, to become everyone's dream, but no one's home. It's heartbreaking, truly, that a woman with so much warmth was met again and again with cold departures. That even in moments of joy, there was always a shadow, the memory of something lost too soon or something never fully found. Diane Lane's love life was not a tabloid scandal. It was a quiet war, a silent ache, a history of giving too much in rooms too loud to hear her needs. And maybe that's why she stopped naming the men. Maybe that's why she stopped letting the world into her heart. Because when you've been left enough times, you start to believe the leaving is your fault. And when you believe that, you learn to love in whispers. She never remarried after her second divorce. Not because she didn't believe in love, but because she finally believed in herself more. She chose peace. She chose stillness. She chose to carry her wounds with dignity rather than let them be dissected by strangers. That in itself is a love story. A woman who finally gave herself what no one else could. Some women write their love stories in vows and anniversaries. Diane Lane wrote hers in silences, in glances, in the spaces between scenes. And though the world may never know the full truth of who touched her soul, she knows. And that truly is enough. Among all the men whose names have floated beside Diane Lane's over the years, one continues to stir quiet speculation. Not because of scandal or heartbreak, but because of the rare chemistry that never became a love story. Richard Gere. They first shared the screen in the Cotton Club, 1984. Both young, luminous, and carrying the kind of screen presence that draws attention even in silence. That project came and went, but something lingered. Not a romance, but a kind of recognition. The way two people can look at each other and know there's a deep understanding, even if it stays unnamed. Decades later, in Unfaithful 2002, they reunited, this time as husband and wife, navigating the collapse of marriage. Their performances were raw, honest, painfully restrained, so convincing, so nuanced, that audiences were certain there had to be something more. There wasn't, at least not in the way fans hoped. Lane addressed the rumors with grace. In an interview, she said, "Richard and I have a very natural rapport. There's mutual respect. I think that's what people are responding to. Not a romance, but a deep familiarity. Geared to remain clear and kind. She's wonderful. We trust each other. That's all it is." But for viewers, especially those who watched Unfaithful or Nights in Rodanthe, where they again played lovers caught in fragility of second chances, the question always returned. What if there's a special kind of connection that lives between them? Not passionate, not possessive, but peaceful. On screen, they move like people who had once shared something off-screen. Their silences said more than their dialogue. And that's where the audience filled in the blanks. Not because they were misled, but because the chemistry felt rare, familiar, almost too perfect to be fiction. They were never seen holding hands, never linked by scandal. But over time, their shared project became emotional bookmarks in the minds of fans. Tiny time capsules of what might have been. They had grace, they had rhythm, and they had the kind of presence that left people quietly rooting for something real. But maybe that was the magic. They never touched the thread too tightly. They let it stay taut, suspended between them, respected and intact. And in doing so, they protected what made it meaningful. Not every connection needs to be lived to be remembered. Not every relationship needs a kiss to be real. In a way, the most powerful thing between Diane Lane and Richard Gere wasn't romance. It was restraint. The comfort of being seen without needing to be claimed. The knowledge that someone respects you so deeply, they never try to make it something else. For those who hoped, and many did, it's a gentle disappointment. But it's not sadness. It's a soft sigh, a quiet understanding that some people are meant to be beautifully aligned, just never together. They were never lovers, but they were something rare in Hollywood. Two people who saw each other truly and held that space with care. And perhaps that's why the chemistry never faded, because it was never exploited. Just felt, just shared. For those watching from afar, it was enough to wonder, enough to wish, enough to hold on to a version of them, not in tabloid snapshots, but in the eyes they gave each other on screen. And that version, it still lives quietly in the hearts of those who watched and hoped. She lives quietly now. No headlines, no hand-holding at premieres, no flashes from paparazzi catching her in the wrong moment. Diane Lane, at 60, has stepped into a chapter of life many actresses never get to write, one of peace, choice, and quiet dignity. She resides in Los Angeles, surrounded not by crowds, but by quiet spaces she's curated herself. Gardens, books, silence. She has nothing left to prove, and that perhaps is her greatest freedom. She never remarried after her divorce from Josh Brolin, not because she gave up on love, but because she no longer needed it to define her. She once said, "Peace is underrated." And that seems to be what she's chosen now. Not another romance to repair what's broken, but stillness to honor what's whole. Diane remains close to her daughter Eleanor, her greatest love, her quiet legacy. Eleanor, now a young woman with a voice and path of her own, has often walked red carpets beside her mother, but their bond goes far deep in appearances. They've survived pain together. They've rebuilt trust. Diane once recalled with a soft smile how she used to embarrass Eleanor during her teenage years, just to make her laugh. It wasn't just parenting. It was healing in disguise. Professionally, she never really disappeared. She just became more selective, more intentional. She recently returned to television with powerful roles that reflect her maturity and subtlety, portraying women with history behind their eyes. Her performances don't beg for attention. They draw you in slowly, like her. She lent her voice to the animated world again as the mother in Inside Out 2 and appeared in the series Feud. Capote versus The Swans, playing Slim Keith, a role full of elegance, restraint, and silent strength. It was a perfect mirror. She works when she chooses, loves who she chooses, and spends most of her time doing what many Hollywood stars forget to do, being human, not icon. She no longer lives for the camera but for connection, with herself, with her craft, with the people she trusts. She volunteers. She speaks out when it matters. But mostly, she listens to the world, to herself, to the quiet that once terrified her but now feels like home. There are no public romances now. No rumors. Just a woman who's finally learned that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, and that solitude isn't loneliness when it's chosen. She walks into rooms differently these days, not seeking attention, but offering presence, grace, history, and something rarer, honesty. Perhaps that's what makes her so beloved even now. Not the roles, not the beauty, but the way she carries the weight of what she's lived, without bitterness, without regret, just a quiet kind of truth that lingers long after she leaves the screen. She doesn't need to be in every movie. She doesn't want to be remembered for one. She wants to be remembered, if at all, as someone who stood tall in the silence, who kept walking even when the lights dimmed, and who, through every heartbreak, never lost a part of her that still believed in beginnings. Diane Lane is now in her 60s, a season of life that many reach but few carry with such quiet grace and depth. Behind the beauty, behind the roles, behind the red carpet smiles lives a woman who has endured more than most will ever see. She faced instability in childhood. She survived heartbreaks that didn't make headlines. She was misunderstood by the people closest to her. Even while the world cheered for her on screen, still she never stopped showing up. She didn't reinvent herself loudly. She evolved gently, through stillness, through strength, through choosing roles that mattered over roles that sold. She has lived many lives in one. The daughter who waited, the mother who stayed, the actress who never needed the spotlight to be seen. Through every chapter, public or private, she carried herself with elegance, with honesty, and with something rare, sincerity. Her life may not be perfect. It may not be loud, but it is real and it is hers. And maybe that is what makes her story so unforgettable. So if Diane Lane has ever touched your heart through a film, a moment, a silence that said more than words, tell us in the comments. What does her story mean to you? What moment do you remember most? Let us know, and together, let's honor the quiet strength behind the screen.